You found product market fit, but now the systems are cracking. The team needs you for everything. Growth feels like quicksand. The more you move, the deeper it pulls you in. This is the scaling paradox, where founders and operators come to get unstuck. I'm Blake Moseni, and I sit down with founders and operators that nearly burnt out and rebuilt their business to operate without them. If you're stuck in the middle, this is where we fix it.
Chasing what you are hungry for. It's not like a teacher or, an engineer where there's this path that you follow that's kind of written out and prescribed. I started as pre-med, and so I have a background in neuroscience, and I was just so enthralled by that. I still to this day, spend decades studying and know nothing. And then I got an MBA, spent some time in the business world, and that was great, but it wasn't enough. And I got another master's in psychology and became a mental health therapist. I don't practice clinically, but it was a way to spend 3,000 hours understanding human behavior at this really deep level. And my background seemed to fit in aligning with them. And here we are.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Scaling Paradox. Today we have Leila Entezam, a neuro-emotional performance coach, working with high performers in bridging the gap between IQ and EQ. With a background in neuroscience and psychology, she has spent over 2 decades understanding the patterns that drive them and the blind spots that hold them back. She has a 100% success rate in helping clients uncover their early life experiences, silently shaping their personal and professional lives. Leila's work helps high performers master their emotions, elevate self-awareness, and discover greater personal and professional fulfillment through the science of how they're wired without losing their competitive advantage. Leila, I am so excited to have you on today's episode.
Thanks, Blake. Excited to be here.
I think the listeners are going to get so much out of your perspective on shifting the mindset and really understanding what's driving the day-to-day with the team members that they're working with. But before we get into any of your work from a neuropsychologist standpoint or the high performers that you work with, I think it would be great for the listeners to get to know you on a little bit more of a personal level. And so I was mulling over what the right question would be for a neuropsychologist. I obviously got a bunch of books behind you. Yeah, I'm sure you interact with people in different occasions. I would ask, for the events that you go to, what is your significant other or close friends, how would they describe you to the audience?
Ooh, good question. They would describe me as intense, but fun, forward, like not blunt, but, I don't sugarcoat, but kind.
That's beautiful. I think, especially for high performers, being blunt and direct probably cuts through, right? Get to the point, give me the action steps and help me get to the outcome that I'm looking for.
And yet, interestingly, if that's all you gave them, because of the nature of my work and my space and why they're with me, if that's all you gave them, there are places in life where that's all they get mostly. So that other piece is the piece that they often, don't get, that kinder, softer, the grace, you're good enough, you're more than enough. And so it gives them a place to have the balance of both.
Amazing. How have you started to curate that skill set and even the customers that you work with or those high performers that you work with? How did you find yourself in this particular space considering your background?
Blake, I get asked that question a lot, and I honestly couldn't tell you in terms of how I ended up here. Like, it's not like a teacher or, an engineer where there's this path that you follow that's kind of, written out and prescribed. I started as pre-med, and so I have a background in neuroscience, and I was just so enthralled by that. Yeah, I still to this day, spend decades studying and know nothing. And then I got an MBA, spent some time in the business world, and that was great, but it wasn't enough. And I got another master's in psychology, and I became a mental health therapist. I don't practice clinically, but it was a way to spend 3,000 hours understanding human behavior at this really deep level. And it was like putting those puzzle pieces together just landed me here. My brother was the first high performer I knew. So it was like I kind of, had a foundation in understanding that. And then, I started coaching executives through a colleague of mine and then, more and more niche high performer executives. And my background seemed to fit in aligning with them. And
Sure.
here we are.
Beautiful. It's funny how serendipitous life is, right? If you continue down the journey and are in the pursuit of knowledge, you are able to take all these building blocks and cobble together your own version of your optimal reality, which sounds
And
like
yet,
that's
if
what
you
you've
left
done.
it up to your own devices, you never would have known to even write this.
Truth, right? And I think it's somewhat liberating for people to hear something like that, which is the idea that though you are told in the early part of your life, go be an engineer, go be a doctor. I know we could both resonate on that, both being Persian, right? Go be a lawyer, and that be the linear path of professionalism to the outcome that you're looking for, versus really just trusting the process and trusting your passion and trusting that if you can derive knowledge and add value to a certain group of people, you can create a path all in itself.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is chasing what you are hungry for. Like I said a second ago, of how many decades I've spent studying the brain. I'm always hungry for that. Human behavior, neuroscience, why do we do what we do? Personally and professionally, I'm chasing that in knowledge. So
based off those brains that you're in pursuit of, who ends up on your roster? What's the personality type? You could say high performer, but that's somewhat nebulous. So maybe we could really drill down on who are the people that you work with on a regular basis.
So usually an executive, an entrepreneur, someone in an ultra high performing space, and they are either, killing it at work, but they're emotionally disconnected, or they feel like something's empty or something's missing, or they're struggling with their leadership team or connecting with the people in their organization. So in this one sort of vertical of life, they are crushing it, but there's this other vertical that has something missing, which is typically something related to connection with themselves or connection with others.
What causes that void? And maybe that is a very broad question, but it would be just good to understand and maybe a better way to frame it is, what are the symptoms? So if a listener is listening and they've categorized themselves as a high performer, how do they know if something's missing as they're pursuing and executing in all other facets of their life?
So I can answer sort of both questions similarly of the what
Sure.
causes it and what are the symptoms. Is that if you're looking at the organization, or if you're looking at the analytical pieces, if you're looking at the numbers, a lot of times those pieces are doing well, but they don't feel connected to their leadership team. More importantly, the leadership team doesn't feel connected to them. Or if it's more in their personal life, they just feel like, okay, I'm doing all this, I've got all this, and now what? There's like this. Is this it? What's supposed to happen now?
Yeah, I've gotten to the top of the mountain and I'm looking across the landscape and realizing that maybe this isn't the scene that I was looking to see in pursuit of this journey.
Right. Like, is this what it was for?
Yeah. It was all the sacrifice to drive for this particular outcome. And so you called out an interesting thing, is specifically around how individuals are interacting with their leadership team. And so where does this high IQ, high performer mentality start to break or become a liability? Because to your point, that individual has been able to be an engine for whatever has driven them to the certain location that they've gotten to in their life, that moniker of success in their life. And maybe they're leading a team and maybe there's friction amongst that team. So when does that IQ and knowledge and skill set start to rub teams the wrong way and create that unnecessary friction?
When it is not balanced with EQ, so that they aren't spending time in connection, in empathy, in understanding how, however they're moving through space as a leader is affecting the rest of the organization. When an interaction is more based on, here's the thing I need, what's the status on it, did it get done? And it's missing the part about, how's your wife? How was the weekend? Sorry to hear you're not feeling well. Some of those things.
Yeah. So when some of the social, when it's just business and there's some of the social elements that actually help enable people to feel connected is missing. And so I think you've come up with a diagnostic framework that you've leveraged to help really anchor your high performing clients to understand where are the symptoms and where are some of the opportunities. Can you talk the listeners through what that looks like?
So the framework is more a tool for decision making that is universal and comprehensive. So it's called setup. The S is for your somatics, which is your physical sensations in your body, like your stomach is in knots, your shoulders are tense. The E is for your emotions. What are you feeling? The T is for your thoughts. What thoughts are in your head? The U is for your universe. What else is in your universe? Are you excited about an upcoming vacation? Did you almost get in an accident on your way here? And the P is for your physiology. How well did you sleep last night? Are you hungry? Are you stuffed from a full lunch? And so what happens is a lot of times we're not aware that decision making is really complex and it has touch points in each of these pillars. And so I can make a decision. Let's say, for example, you got in a fight with your significant other, and now you're making a business decision, or you snap at someone, on your leadership team or a colleague, and you think it was about whatever happened here. It's all one brain, one database. And so whatever happened with you and your disagreement with your significant other is still there in the background, and most of what you do is subconscious. And so without the clarity of thought to know, hey, was any of what my reaction to what happened with my colleague here, was it all just about what happened, or was any of it a projection of something else I was bringing over? And so setup allows you to take a quick inventory of like, okay, what's going on for me in this moment? I was doing a presentation last week, actually, and one of the CEOs, the example he used is, so would I use that if I was firing someone? And I said, yes, actually. You would stop and you would think, okay, what's going on for me? What are the emotions I'm feeling? And then you would also try to run through their setup. Where might they be, what are they feeling? What are they thinking in this moment? And so that also allows you to step into greater empathy. And now you're coming into this conversation from that position.
So it's a multifaceted system where you can use it for yourself, you can use it for team members, and the whole premise is these high performers typically are operating less from a stance of EQ, and this is a framework that someone could apply to help navigate more effective EQ implementation. Is how I would characterize it. Okay, and so maybe you could talk us through, I know you used a high-level example as part of a conversation you had last week, or a speaking engagement you had last week. Do you have an example of someone you've worked with where you've applied that? You don't have to use anybody's names, obviously, but where how that flow and system has identified where there's a gap, helped solve for that particular problem for the individual, and what were some of the results associated to it?
Yeah, actually, the example that comes to mind is one of my clients, the CEO of a consumer product goods, a CPG company, and kind of, okay relationship with the kids at home, and surface level relationship with the leadership team. A couple people he was a little more connected to, some friction with some board members, and yet, the organization was functioning and profitable and all the things. And in working together, looking to see where are the emotional blind spots that are causing you to show up the way that you're showing, such that each of these buckets has something missing. And so at home, it was, what are the things that you can do to connect more authentically with your kids? They started a bedtime routine, trying to be more present with them, looking for the little things they can do together. With the board, it was coming to understand that one of the board members that he was very triggered by was actually triggering him, because it was triggering, the board member reminded him of his dad and being hypercritical as a child, and nothing was good enough. And so when he was able to separate, hey, this isn't you responding to your dad, that story is over. This is a board member, totally different. You don't need to bring up the same sort of, brain database files. Then he was able to step into that differently and sort of, write a new narrative for that relationship as well. And so in each bucket, shifting that dynamic.
It's interesting. Like what I'm hearing come through slightly, and I don't know if you've read this book or had some exposure to this system as well. Have you heard of IFS, or internal family systems?
IFS from a clinical perspective, yes.
Yeah, clinical perspective.
Yes.
And obviously, this is a business application of what you're getting at. But I feel like there are elements of IFS that I'm kind of hearing shine through in some of the framework that you've built out as well, too, which is really getting to the root of why you do what you do and what's driving some of those behaviors. And I think for the listener, first step is recognition that there's a gap. And you spoke a little bit about this feeling of emptiness and not feeling connected, whether that is to your leadership team or whether that's on a personal level, or you're getting these amazing results and you're not necessarily realizing the outcomes. And so that is the initial trigger. Then you're supposed to get curious about that. And you've given a framework to say, okay, how do I become more empathetic towards myself and towards others and walk in those shoes? How can someone go deep? And is it possible to do it without a guide helping facilitate that? And interested in what your view is on the pros and cons of a guide versus non-guided. Obviously, this is a service that you provide, but would be just interested to hear what your POV is on that.
So the challenge is that your own brain is your only frame of reference. And so without an external observer, you're taking your own observations as truth. If they're blind spots, by nature of them being blind, you wouldn't know them. It's harder to have a deeper understanding of where these things coming from. And in my work, we care more about why you do what you do than what you do, because the why is that deeper driver. And so there are, in my experience and in my opinion, you can definitely and should definitely do, a lot of legwork on your own, but to get to a deeper place, some kind of outside observer, ideally is well versed or better versed in human behavior, that would know how to park their own biases, would know how to check their own projections so that they're not bringing their baggage to you as well.
Absolutely. So it's this idea that the external perspective can help shift your frame of reference. I'm going to take it a step further. Obviously, you're a rock star, and we want everyone that's listening to this podcast to go have a conversation with you. If someone is looking for something more local to them, if maybe they're not in your geography or whatever that looks like, how do you qualify if someone has the right expertise and skill set to be asking those thought-provoking questions to shift your frame of reference? How would you rate yourself and even analyze others on that same spectrum?
From a connection perspective, irrespective of whatever the person's professional background is do you resonate with them? Do you click with them? Does their style work for you? If I remind you of your third grade teacher and she was really cruel to you and you have really bad memories, it doesn't matter how credentialed I am. That is something that, remember, it's one brain, one database. Most of what you do is subconscious. And so that's something that is already subconsciously coloring your perception of me. And so it's how do you connect and resonate with this person? And then, but always asking yourself, and what do you own about that? And so if we're not connecting, I should be asking myself, is that on me? Am I not being open? Am I not being truthful? And so that's one piece of it. And then the second is that part of the challenge is in today's world, anybody can show up and call themselves a coach. I see people calling themselves neuroscientists and they don't even have the credentials. I see people saying they're an expert in something, and then you look at their background and it has nothing to do with that. And so looking to see, okay, this thing this person says they're an expert in, what backs that up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the notion of continuing to rest on credentials. Like, to your point, anybody can claim they're a guru at one thing or the next, but actually validating that with data and information. Based off all the conversations that you've had, what are the most thematic undertones that seem to influence these high performers to behave one way or another? Because I've heard you reference a couple different things, right? It's like a childhood memory that influences one person a certain way. It's a particular relationship with a parent. So there's a whole litany of things that fall underneath the different categories. And I'm wondering if you've boiled it down to some common themes that you're typically watching out for that impact people.
100%.
So tell me more. Say more.
I don't even need to let you finish the sentence. It's your early 100% of the time. However you're showing up as today is rooted in your early years. That doesn't say, that's not to say your early years were bad. There was nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with you. It has nothing to do with that. It is that it's your early years where you form foundational definitions of things like love and trust and rejection and safety. And then you spend the rest of your life navigating the world based on those definitions and reconciling them and adjusting them and things like that. So significant life events after your early years matter as well, for sure. But the foundation is laid in your early years.
So basically what you're saying is, and I'm going to pull out some of what I've read and learned over the years, and you challenge me, use those credentials to tell me if I'm just making stuff up for the listeners, all right? So stuff that I've read has basically said that up until about age 7, you're in something called theta state, which means your brain waves are essentially like a recording mode, where there's like similar parallels between theta state and like meditation or hypnosis. And it's where your mind and brain are just open to consuming more information. Once again, challenge me if anything I'm saying is off base. And so to your point, that becomes some of the foundational view of what or how you see and understand the world based off what you've been exposed to. And that is a product of your parents, that's a product of your family, that's a product of your macro environment that you're operating in. Would you agree with that age range of the early years, or is
Yes.
it wider than that?
In terms of
Or more
foundational, yes, I would agree with that. And you have to think about why. That your brain's number one job is survival. And so you came out of the womb and you're looking at this thing called the world, and you're like, what is this? How do I move through this? What do I do? So your brain is taking in so much information, trying to figure out its place in the world, trying to make meaning. And in that meaning making, it's saying, okay, this happens and we cry and then no one notices. This happens and we cry and we're hugged and cuddled and cared for. This happens and people are yelling. This happens and, people are laughing and smiling. And so your brain is taking all of that in and saying, which ones, bring me more towards safety? Which ones bring me more towards, cause for concern?
Yeah, it's interesting because if those are some of the foundational building blocks, then what I'm hearing you get at is this concept that you're effectively building in a mechanism for confirmation bias. You have these early beliefs, you see the world a certain way based off those early beliefs, then your mind starts to filter for how you see and understand, then you see more of the same thing over and over again, and that becomes like a self-perpetuating sort of system. And so I'll get to some other brain comments that I do have, but I want to key into this particular question, which is, if you have these early foundational things, a coach is going to come in, is going to analyze or at least ask some thought-provoking questions that help shift your vantage point from one side to the next. And then what's the timeline to work through that? How long does it typically take people to unpack some of those reactions that they have? Because and then here's the brain stuff I was going to call out, which is, I understand that there's like the limbic system, which is your reptilian brain, and it's reacting strictly based off of emotion and based on what it's pulling in. Then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is helping you like logic and rationalize through the world and the world that you're operating in. So you're able to work through and control the limbic system to a certain degree, leveraging the prefrontal. But how do people strengthen their prefrontal? And I hope I'm not losing the listeners with some of this jargon, but strengthen their logic control center so that as their limbic system is firing in different situations based off of what their early years have foundationally laid for them, like what's the duration to get through that and how many reps are need to be put into to get to that next level?
Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So a couple of things. One is
I'm a 2+2 sort of guy. Like I am. I was going to say mohandes for the listeners. That's engineer in Farsi through and through. So big numbers guy. But yeah, tell us how it works.
So two things. One is that question of like, all right, tell me what to do. Let me knock it out of the park, especially for high performers, is very typical in the sense that that's how their approach to things. But this doesn't work like that because it's emotions. It's how blocked are you? How far down did you shove these things? How open are you? And so part of that is I can't predict that for you. And sure. I can't tell you how often you start to peel the layers and there's a lot more stuff under there that the person has sort of shoved away so far for so long. I actually just was in a conversation yesterday where the gentleman said, I'm uncovering things that I had just forgotten about, and events that I forgot had happened. And so that's part of it. And then in terms of the reptilian and the limbic and the prefrontal, what happens is you bring up these memories and it's understanding, okay, this thing that happened, this experience that I had, or this definition that I made, where did it come from? And then does it need to be updated today? Do I need to change that definition? Is it still serving me? So as an example, if what I learned was vulnerability was not safe and that if I expressed my emotions, I looked weak or nobody cared anyway. Everybody was too busy trying to pay the bills or there was too much chaos in the home or things like that. Then I learned, okay, shut down vulnerability. And so now we're saying, okay, great. We're going to rewrite that. Does that serve you in today's world? Why does it serve you? How does it serve you? where, what speaks to you in terms of how to get that rewritten? What are your opportunities to exercise that rewrite? How willing and open are you to do that rewrite? And so that's why it's those two pieces working together.
That makes sense. It's this idea of, is someone willing to do the work? Because I think that's really what it boils down to, is the path of self-discovery and true understanding. I qualify it as self-actualization. It's a lot of work, and a lot of people want, and this is no knock on anybody using this, but a lot of people don't want to go to the gym and diet. They just want their Ozempic and to have the outcome on the back end of things.
Well, it's funny you use that example. I was just thinking, it's like if you said, Leila, how long would it take me to lose 50 pounds? We could go anywhere from it'll take you a couple weeks to years.
Sure.
I saw you had run 50 miles recently. If you said, Leila, how long would it take me to be good enough to run 50 miles? There's so many variables affecting that.
I appreciate the call out that no path is linear, and everyone gets to their destination in a different form or fashion. I think,
and yet, sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
Everyone has a way to get there, which means I think it's the difference between asking, are people capable of getting there, or are they willing? And I have an immense belief in people's capability. You are capable of doing it. It's, do you want to do it? Are you willing to do it?
It's so funny. I have such a similar view of the world. And someone actually recently challenged me on this. I don't know if I shared this on a previous episode or not. I've always had the view that anything you want in this world is possible. It's just, are you willing to put the energy and the effort in to realize the outcome? Someone challenged me on it recently, and I'm still torn. Like the jury's out on whether my frame of mind is fully shifted on this. But it's this idea that if someone wants to go to the NBA or the NFL or some of these different sporting leagues, it's not to say it's not possible. Probability drops substantially just based off of genetic makeup, right? Like if you're showing up and you're 5'3" and you're trying to go into the NBA, like the probability pretty low. You can work on that jump shot. You can do a lot of things, but there's the ability to achieve that outcome is substantially lower. And so they challenged me basically using that example and then saying cognition of certain individuals, like certain people just have different hardware in their minds, which enables them to process and operate at just a different level than other players. And that's a similar notion of how you are born and what your height and what your weight is and the makeup. And so I think I tend to believe that on most things in life, people have the capability, but do they have the want and desire? But also, do they have the awareness and wherewithal to even be able to identify where that problem actually exists? Now, capacity is a whole different conversation that maybe has some factor in the outcome as well too. But interested to hear, like on that spectrum, what
I'm
are
going to add another
thoughts?
ingredient to that is that, and this is one of the distinguishers for high performers, is that you can have the ability and you can have the capability and the awareness and all those things, and then do you have the discipline? I actually did a post on this recently that I got a lot of feedback on, that was about if you could have one superpower in the world, that in my opinion, discipline would be it. Because discipline is that willingness to, when everyone else stops, or to go where no one else is willing to go. When you ran that 50 miles, the discipline it took for you to get there, it's like I tell people I wake up every morning to work out. There is no part of me that wakes up and says, oh my God, this is so great.
Yeah.
But it's understanding that it's anchored in something greater. And so that, and that's one of the things about high performers, is that ability, that place they tap into where you're just like, how do they achieve this all? And part of it is they just keep going.
Well, I think the funny thing on that, and I've used this quote with multiple people, it's overnight success that's been 15 years in the making. Something along those lines is what the quote is. And no one sees someone waking up at, and I'll just use this example, 5 a.m., 4 a.m., whatever the time is to be able to go do the training for a 50-mile run every single day for 6 months or a year leading up to an event, or the injuries and all the things that come along with that. They only see the post or the outcome that the event was achieved. And I think to your point, it's so true for any accomplishment. Everyone, especially in today's day and age, you and I were spending some time talking about earlier on in the conversation, all the gurus coming out talking about how they're neuroscientists and everything along those lines, but don't actually have the credentials. It's everyone wants the virality or the success that they see on these posts or the hack is maybe the best way to characterize it. Assuming it's going to happen like that, not realizing that it all comes back to fundamentals and continuing to build that compound interest over time is really where the results are found.
Yes.
And so you called something out as we were chatting, which is this idea of, as you're working with, that they have the capability to reset their software. And that software reset is their shifting of how they're seeing the world based off of previous expectations that have been supplanted in their mind or how they view the world. And really, what I'm hearing you allude to, I talk about this with different friends and family members, is this idea of generational trauma. And I don't like to use trauma because I feel like the word is so overused to a certain degree. But if we take it back to this idea of, okay, ages 1 through 7 or 0 to 7, you're recording and absorbing all this information around your family, your friend, your community, your environment. There is inherent beliefs that are being supplanted in your mind on how you operate, to your point, to stay safe and how one can succeed in this world. And I think being able to identify family beliefs, societal beliefs, and really unpack if that's who you are and if you want that hardware and software, that software supplanted in your system is so much of where the unlock is. I'm reading a book right now called The Big Leap. Have you read that before?
Sounds familiar, but no, I have not.
Spectacular read. Gay Hendricks, PhD, he basically talks about upper limiting beliefs. And when you're at these different inflection points in life or success levels that you're achieving, you hit these points where you're going to start realizing friction. Like maybe you're a highly successful event at work, you just hit these crazy numbers, and next thing you know, you're at home and you're in an argument with your spouse. It's like your belief system doesn't align with your level of excellence and success. And because of that, it manifests itself in negative ways by blocking the positive flow of energy. So there's a little bit of like woo-woo energy stuff in there as well too, which is good. But what I want to get to, and I think the key question based off everything that I've shared, is diagnosing the software around some of the generational stuff and the dogmatic things that have been supplanted in the mind. Are there any techniques that you would recommend to really be able to explore some of those things?
Well, so let me take a step back. The tweak I would offer is you said something about a software reset. And my challenge with that is a reset is like I'm erasing what existed. Whereas your brain doesn't work like that. There's no erasing of what existed. There's a rewriting of a narrative. And so if I have generational trauma, the generational trauma in a reset is still the trauma. It's rewriting the meaning making of it, the definitions I formed, the way I internalized it. And so that's the first thing I would say. And then your question was something to the effect of, okay, great. And then, what would you do with that? What would you do with that rewriting? And so it's the rewriting. It's the willingness to pull up these things that, whether they're beliefs or experiences or definitions, the willingness to look at them. And a lot of high performers, I hear so often, I'm afraid if I look at my emotions, I'll get stuck there. If I look at the past, I'll get stuck there. And it's not about getting stuck there. It's about going there and moving through it. And so it's pulling up those files out of the database saying, okay, what does chapter 17 say? Reading that narrative, saying, okay, here's the things that I would now edit that, these beliefs no longer serve me, or I have enough experience in the world to say, these things aren't true anymore. I am safe. Vulnerability is okay. I can communicate effectively with a loved one. It is okay to connect with people and they'll connect back with you. And so looking at and editing that narrative in a way that suits the person and serves the person that you are today.
I appreciate the idea of editing. To your point, we're not going to be... My daughter is into Frozen right now, and there's a scene where they like pull a thought out and they delete something from one of the characters' minds. We're not doing that. So I like the idea of editing thoughts and beliefs based off of new circumstances or new environments, really challenging yourself to ask the question, does this serve me anymore? When working within a team, I'll bring it back to some of the day-to-day of what some of the operators and listeners are working on. How do those changes start to manifest into team level engagements? And how often are these conversations turning into exercises that these high performers are going and implementing with their teams, with their spouses? What does that look like?
So the how often is all the time, because whether
Sure.
it's a team, a spouse, a family member, the leadership, it's people. And so this is fundamentally about human connection and engagement, no matter what who the human is to you. And so
Sure.
the how often is all the time, and then the how is that you're going back to, so that human that is coming to that team environment is bringing their database and their experiences and what they know about whether it's safe to communicate, and what they know about whether they feel heard or not, and what they know about, do they typically feel seen, or when someone raises their voice, what does that mean? Do they shut down, or do they raise their voice back? And so you're bringing those understandings to that team environment and saying, okay, based on that, what are the things I can do to optimize my show up to this team environment to enhance our performance?
I like that. It's constant iteration. It's understanding where where your team members are coming from. And so let's say we've gone through this exercise, we've identified some opportunities for improvement, and we're trying to work through those. What's a repeatable system that can be done on, say, a weekly basis for someone to look themselves in the mirror and say, hey, okay, I'm going into the office. These are some of my blind spots, whether it's having to be the smartest person in the room or not having the right EQ with the different team members. What are the things that person should have on a sticky note to remind themselves to go think about and do going into the start of a week?
I would say I would make it much more micro than that. That it's not even about the start of a week. That if
Sure.
you use the setup tool, actually on my website, I have a tool you can just download and put up on your wall. That
Sure.
if you use that tool on a day-to-day, on a conversation to conversation, on a decision to decision, and say, let me take 30 seconds and tune in with myself and say, where am I at right now? What am I bringing to the table? In this all staff meeting we're about to have, or in this, decision we're about to make, whether to greenlight a project or not. Is my decision to greenlight this project premature, but I'm driven to do it because I just took a big loss in the market and I'm looking for a win, and I'm saying, yeah, I'll get it here. And now that's what's driving me to, put a green light to something I normally wouldn't if I stopped to say, let me actually kind of take an inventory of how, who's the whole person showing up right now.
I think that's really the punchline here, is who's the whole person showing up and what are some of the influences coming in, and taking a step back to actually analyze that versus just being in the flow of execution. And so that actually begs to a really interesting question, which is, so many operators qualify themselves as so busy. There's so many different priorities. They're getting pulled in all sorts of different directions. And I think that is often used as an excuse. Sorry to the listeners that are taking offense to this, but used as an excuse to say, hey, I don't have time to be thinking about those things. And so interested in your perspective on prioritization of stepping out of some of the day-to-day operations and reframing the mindset. And what helps create the headspace for the listeners to actually invest in that?
So I think how do you create the space is to minimize the noise. There is so much literal noise, social media noise, environmental noise in our lives today, that minimizing the noise so that you can just get quiet long enough to tune into what you have to say internally. And so I forgot what the first question was.
It's really this idea of how do you create space for these activities to happen? And what you're saying is really just let's minimize the noise and really be clear on what your purpose is and what you're trying to accomplish. And so if your mission every single day is to say, hey, I have to deliver these two objectives, and then the third objective that's always there is to be the best leader that I can be, and being aware is that third objective. I think that creates some of the personal clarity that's required to be able to say, this is where and how you focus your energy to get the results that we're looking for.
And I would marry it back to what we said earlier about discipline. So it's, okay, what do I do? Minimize the noise. Well, I'm too busy, like you said. How do I make time to do that? It's the discipline to say, well, if I cut 10 minutes off of social media, or binge watching something, or snoozing the alarm, could I get that 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour, whatever the case may be?
I like that a lot. And there's always time to be cut from one of these things that are consuming our time. Boredom doesn't exist anymore. I think that is a moniker of the 90s. early
You know,
2000s.
It's interesting how many high performing clients I have who part of their practice is intentional. Like one of them says he literally calendars time to sit on the couch and stare out the window. And some variation of that is rampant through the population I work with.
I really appreciate that call out. And I've actually been trying to create more of that space for myself. I find that where I get a lot of clarity is running. That's part of we talked about what creates discipline. I think there's also like, can you find places where you can get some sort of dopamine drop that helps a certain outcome that helps enable discipline over time. Atomic Habits is also a great book for creating discipline for the listeners that are looking for some good nuggets on creating strategy there. The idea of creating silence and boredom, I think, is where your genius actually can shine through. Like you have an inner voice, you have a view of the world, you have a perception of how things are operating, and being able to make the connections that are needed and to see the playing field fully, you need silence and space to enable that. And I think some of that's been lost in some of the hustle culture that exists, where it's like work 100 hours a week nonstop and like keep going. And I think I've spoken about this with previous podcast guests. There's a time and a place to grind and to hustle and to push. And that needs to be a tool in the toolbox, but also being able to create the headspace is really what it comes down to think through and understand where some of those opportunities live.
Yeah, there's so similar to your running, mine is walking and hiking, being outdoors. And my favorite hikes and walks are where the cell phone reception cuts out.
Yes.
There's nobody out there. And I'm like, this is heaven.
Yes. Right? Like no one can reach me.
And it's incredible. Like some of my best thoughts and work and content and whatever and ahas come out there in the middle of nowhere.
It's funny. That inner voice knows what it wants. You just got to give it space to be able to have an opportunity to speak. It's one other thing I'll call out similar to what you've started to do is I've started to at times, especially if I'm with my spouse or my family, I'll just leave my phone at home. I'm like, I'm with the people that need to be able to reach me. If they really need some sort of emergency, they'll reach out to my spouse, and I'm just not going to have a device so I can be fully present in this moment. And it's been extremely rewarding. It definitely is worth that.
Yeah. So my variation is what I do is because my parents are older, and so I just think, hey, if there was ever an emergency or something, I want them to be able to reach me. I'll take my phone, but I'll put it on the silent, and so emergency people still
still reach out, right? Like do not disturb. That's a good move.
Yeah,
that's a really good move.
That's my little trick.
I like it. So you've worked with a lot of founders and high-performing individuals, and you've seen all sorts of different mindsets and frameworks on how people are operating. What do you think is the most common myth that a high performer carries about leadership and how they should behave as a leader that needs to shift or go away?
That emotions don't matter. That the emotional piece is not as relevant, whether it's the human engagement or whether it is the emotions of the early years or having emotional fulfillment today, that piece is not as significant. That emotions aren't affecting the decision I'm making right now. I'm so clear. No, you're not.
The P&L says this is what we need to do. This is how it needs to operate. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, maybe in a world of AI agents where there's less emotion and human interaction, those type of individuals will thrive and perform. But no, I agree with you. There's a certain threshold that people get capped at. And I actually want to ask you a question around high performers in general. So this is based in hearsay. So I'm going to qualify that for the listeners before I ask this question. But you see a lot of these high performing organizations. You see the Amazons of the world. You see, let's even call it like the Teslas or the SpaceXs of the world. And there is a certain perception of what a work environment looks like and what is acceptable in terms of interaction. Now, I cannot sit here. I know people that work at all those companies in like the largest companies in the world. There is a perception or idea that it's not emotional and it is strictly based off execution, performance, and delivery. And I could see both sides of the spectrum. Where I struggle with this, because I've asked this on previous podcasts, but I tend to subscribe to you want to show up as your full self, be able to connect with people. Obviously, results matter. You hold people to account on results, but if they don't feel connected to the entity or the organization, the stickiness of that relationship and the ability to continue to career growth with individuals joining any corporation gets significantly diminished. And so what I'm asking is, what's your view on some of the largest companies that seem to be less emotionally focused but have the highest results associated to them versus companies that are more emotionally focused? And how do the listeners navigate that dichotomy when it comes to the human element of things versus the results element of things? And how do you marry the two?
I think you can be that amazingly performing company in the world. It just means that people can get very well paid, but are they happy working there? Are they fulfilled? Do you grind them to the bone? Some of those organizations that you refer to, or you didn't name, but when you talk about people who talk about working there, but when you talk to people who talk about working there and they just tell you like what kind of an environment it is, but I'm here because it's a good name or because it's innovative or because I'm making good money, not because I'm happy, not because I'm fulfilled, not because there's, so much connection and joy. So you can have that if you look at, some of the purpose-driven organizations that have great numbers, but also have some of that other stuff going on.
Do you have any examples of those?
The one that came to mind was Patagonia, but then I didn't mention it because I thought, well, I don't know enough about their numbers and everything. But
their numbers are solid, right? Like that's a very, very reputable brand, to your point, and it's more purpose-driven. I think what you're getting at is just, who do you want to be and what do you want to accomplish in the world is really the question for any business leader to ask themselves along the journey. And based off of that, you can ask yourself the question, how you want to position your organization to facilitate those outcomes. I think it's too much of a reach to sit here and say that like maybe the early days of some of these large corporations that have scaled up to be the largest companies in the world didn't have to have some of the emotional connection to get to that step or to the level and scale that they've gotten to be able to operate the way that they are. And so I think it's, at least what I'm taking away from it, is it's really understand what your identity is, who you want to be over the long term, but also realize that people are the mechanism of growth in any organization. And there's different levers that you can pull to facilitate the outcome you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And right now, the largest companies in the world that are working people to the bone, maybe are a little less purpose-driven, are incentivizing through capital. And if you're a small to medium-sized business, maybe you don't have that same capital lever to pull. So it's a different perspective of how you can rope in the best talent to take your corporation to whatever destination you're trying to get to. Mm-hmm. This has been a lot of fun, Leila. I appreciate you taking the time to connect. I always like to wrap with a couple targeted questions. One is, if you could go back and give advice to yourself, to your younger self, say 10, 15 years in the past, what would that advice be and why?
To trust myself more in the sense of, for example, this idea of how emotions are so intertwined into every personal, professional, leadership, financial, whatever conversation today is newer, in the last less than a decade in terms of being so prevalent. And yet, decades before that, where I was like, I'm telling you this stuff matters. And then I would see someone bring out a book, about the things that I'm talking about. I'm like, oh my God, they wrote the book about the things that I'm talking about, And so and when you're like, oh my God, this stuff matters. And everyone's like, no, it doesn't. And you're like, but I know it does. And now a decade later, it's everywhere.
It's funny, being fringe till it's mainstream is so hard because it's going against the human biology to a certain extent, right? Like if you think about back to our ancestors, our foundation has been built off of a tribe mentality. So you want to be accepted and a member of the tribe, and you don't want to go against what the broader group is thinking or saying, because if you do, your ability to have shelter and all the other resources that come along with that. And so, but it's interesting because all fringe ideas, not all, but many fringe ideas that eventually become the more popular view of society start off as fringe. An example of that would be us thinking that the Earth is the center of the universe, right? Like at one point, that the fringe ideas that were going around the sun, and no one wanted to say it because they realized some of the risk associated to that, whether it was being excommunicated or exiled or something else to that effect. And so I think that advice is so spot on for the listeners to be able to really reflect on, if there's something that you trust in your gut and that inner voice is saying, going back to what we were talking about before, being able to lean in and understand that is so important. And then the other question I had for you was, What are you excited about? Obviously, you've been working with a lot of high performers. You're seeing the industry change a lot more neuroscience and other talking points coming into the conversation when it comes to leadership, business, and teams. What are you excited about for what the future looks like?
I'm excited about the fact that there are more and more emotion conversations intertwined in conversations like leadership, because it is allowing us to bring some softness, some humanity, some humility, vulnerability to an area that can be so numbers driven. And yet that other element, you're emotional before you're logical. And so that other element, these opportunities to speak to some of those emotional components, I think goes a long way for creating micro changes that turn into macro changes, personally and professionally.
I think that is a great frame. And I think that capitalism is great. Capitalism with emotion is even better. So let's keep leaning in there. I think the listeners, and myself included, have gotten so much from this idea of really analyze why you do what you do and be willing to make edits along the way, because it's going to inherently make the experience for your team members, your family members, and whoever else you're interacting with day in and day out, and even your business that much better. So Leila, thank you so much for joining. Before we jump, where can the listeners find you? I know you called out a website. I know you have a book. Maybe you can give the full download for the audience.
Absolutely. So my website is workwithleila.com. It's Leila. My book is called The Heart of Peak Performance, Emotional Mastery for High-Performing Men. It's a lot of the tools and things that I've sort of used over the years. And the reason it's focused on men is because it's the population I work most with. A lot of the foundational things are relevant to all high performers. And that's available on Amazon as well as on my website. And then the number one place is LinkedIn. I'm very active there. I have a newsletter, a lot of posting there. And so that's the main place I share content.
Awesome. Leila, thanks so much for the time. Listeners, you guys know where to find you. Appreciate you all listening in for this episode. Until next time.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Scaling Paradox. If this helped cut through the chaos, please send it to another founder or operator that's stuck in it too. If you haven't subscribed yet, let's fix that. New episodes of The Scaling Paradox drop every other Thursday. There's no filler in this podcast, just the real work of scaling past yourself.